Hi everyone, this is OCD Live. I'm Ali Grayman, and let's get to some questions. So the first question I have is it normal when you have harm OCD, fear of killing, being a future killer, to have thoughts that sound like statements, like, yes, you want to do it, you're about to kill somebody. In fact, I'm unsure about my own morals right now and I feel like a different person. Is it because of my harm OCD? I'm not that scared of the violent images anymore. In fact, they started to decrease. But now it seems my harm OCD wants me to do it, question mark. I still get the urges, in quotes, can't decide if it's actually me, in quotes, who wants it. And now I'm doubting my sanity and intentions even more. The only thing I want is to prove to myself that I would never be able to kill anyone and that I would never choose to do it, but I can't seem to convince myself about it. Help me, please. Thank you. And the reason why I read to you this whole paragraph is because it's important for people to know how harm OCD feels to the person. Because, you know, sometimes people think that, their OCD is somehow different, or theirs is more severe, and everybody's OCD is 10 out of 10 OCD is severe for everybody, no matter what kind of thoughts you have. And the biggest problem with what I just read to you, why the person is struggling, is because of what the person says in the end. And I'll reread it to you just so you understand what I'm saying. The person says, the only thing I want is to prove to myself that I will never be able to kill anyone and that I would never choose to do it, but I can't seem to convince myself about it. So the person is desperately seeking reassurance. And the more reassurance the person is seeking, the worse the situation is getting. So the more the person tries to figure it out, the more the brain sends the thoughts, because the person gives fear, right? The brain doesn't know. It's like traffic control, you know? It doesn't understand what thought it's sending. It doesn't understand that it's a harm thought or whatever thought. It doesn't get it. It's just sending the thought that the person previously reacted to. If that, for example, if the person reacted to a thought that they didn't even know what it was in a foreign language, the brain would send that thought again. Like in gibberish, say, for example, right? It would send that thought again. So it's not about the content of the thought, it's just about the reaction. That the more the person says, oh my God, maybe I am a future killer, or maybe I killed somebody in the past, let me figure it out. Let me convince myself. The brain's like, oh, you're scared. Let me send you that thought again. And then it sends the thought again. The person goes, oh, yeah, and why am I getting this thought again? That must mean it's true. And, again, it continues that cycle, And the brain can't stop that cycle, because the brain basically throws to you the ball that you throw to the brain. So whatever you throw at the brain will throw back at you. You throw thoughts about harming somebody, like fear of harming somebody, to the brain will give you more thoughts about harming somebody. If you say, okay, like for example, like the person said that if they used to get images, they don't get them anymore because they didn't react anymore. If they're not reacting to the images, the brain is not sending images. But the brain switched to sending a thought of, like trying to figure it out. Like, what if, you're going to kill somebody and all this kind of stuff, right? So the brain is sending you what you're reacting to. If this person completely stopped reacting to harm OCD and started to react to, I don't know, religious thoughts, their OCD would switch to religious OCD. There's no validity in these thoughts. They're just thoughts. They happen to be about harm, You got to think of it this way. And it's not like to give you a reassurance, right? But it's, millions of people have harm OCD and have pretty much the same thoughts, more or less, right? So depending on the situation, theirs might be a little bit different, but they feel the same kind of, it feels just as realistic, And yet nobody has done anything. So what are the chances of, out of the million people, you being the first one who's done something or is going to do something? All the brains are functioning the same way. They're bringing the thoughts that you are reacting to. It's not any different. You just have OCD. But again, until you control that reaction, nothing is going to change. So You need to say, these are my harm OCD thoughts. I'm not going to solve it anymore. I'm not going to try to figure it out. I'm not going to try to convince myself about anything anymore. You know? The thoughts will be there. I'm like, think of your thoughts, like all of your harm OCD thoughts. Put them in a mental car and put them in one lane on the road. And then you, the real you, is driving in a parallel lane. You guys are not intersecting. You're just driving in parallel lanes. Right? Think of it that way. Don't allow the thoughts to impact you. They have nothing to do with you. And as soon as you realize that, they will start to lose power. I mean, it takes a little bit of time, and the brain will start to bring them a little more at first to get you back into reaction and all of that. But they will go away if you stop paying attention to them. You know? And that's why people's OCD switch from one to another, or even within the same, say, harm OCD, but about this or that. Sometimes it switches from one topic to another. And the reason why it switches is because the person got focused on the new topic. So, by nature of focusing on one thing, they're unfocused on the other, on the old thing. And that old thing went away because you're not focusing on it anymore. You're not giving it energy, and it goes away. So stop giving any harm thought energy. You're not going to be the first one to kill anybody, I promise you. So don't give it any more energy. You will start to feel better. But until you do that, and as long as you're searching for that reassurance and chasing that reassurance, you will continue to feel worse. That's the mechanism of OCD. You can't outsmart your own brain. You can't reassure yourself into recovery. However, once you do recover, you will see that all of this was just nothing, so you will get that final reassurance in the end that you did the right thing and that everything was nothing happened, nothing was gonna happen, this was all OCD. But you can't reassure yourself into that state. You have to take a leap of faith and say, I'm disregarding now. I've chosen to disregard. I don't care what my brain says. I've chosen to disregard. I'm not going to be the first one out of millions of people for whom this is real. So I'm not playing that game anymore. And then you will get reassurance, after a little bit of time, because there's a physical component here. Your brain has created mental pathways that attach between fear and anything to do with harm. So it will take a while to undo. So it's not like an instant thing where you make the decision and bam, the thoughts go away. It takes a little bit of time. So you have to be prepared to wait a little bit with it, but you will start to feel better. I promise you, And until you stop with the reassurance and with checking and with figuring it out, I promise you that you won't feel better, because it's like a mechanism. It's simply, this is how it works, There's no way around it. That's the one. I find, though, that this is the one good thing about OCD, is that it's very simplistic, If you're not feeding it, it will go away. If you're feeding it, it will continue to thrive, And there's a good part and a bad part to it, that yes, you can be in control, but it takes a lot of effort to, take that leap of faith, because it is scary, but you have to get past it in order to recover. So the next question I have is, hi Ali, I have a few questions. Is purposely thinking of thoughts to test yourself stopping you from recovering? Yeah, if you purposely think of the thoughts to see if you're a good person or a bad person or whatever, you're seeking reassurance. Of course, it's not even stopping you from recovery, it's making you worse. So next question, is it possible to have OCD on past mistakes and events? And again, these kinds of questions are reassurance. So what you're doing here is you're trying to figure it out if it's OCD or not. And again, the more you do this, the more this is reassurance. You're digging yourself deeper into the OCD. So you have to stop doing that. You have to stop trying to figure out OCD. No matter what kind of OCD you have, don't figure it out. Let it be and view it as only OCD. Choose to view it as only OCD. Because when you're choosing to view it as OCD, you don't really need proof. It's a choice. Choice does not require proof. So I am making the choice to view it as OCD. I don't care. I'm not paying attention. I'm not going to be the first person out of millions of people who have OCD to have something actually for real happen, right? It's not going to be me. That doesn't make sense. So I'm choosing to view it as OCD and move on. So next question I have, is it possible for someone to all of a sudden trigger OCD thoughts? An example of this would be having no thoughts at all. Everything is okay. And then all of a sudden someone mentions something and all of a sudden you start getting OCD thoughts, feelings. Yeah. Yeah, because what's happening is that the mind is focused on your specific topic, right? And whenever your mind can connect that topic to anything, so say you're watching the news or you are I don't know, talking to somebody and they bring up a similar topic, of course it's going to trigger an OCD thought. So, but I would say, view it as an exposure. It's actually a good thing that the thought got triggered. You got exposed to the situation, but now you have to prevent the response of fear. So exposure and response prevention. So every time you do this exercise, you are propelling yourself forward in your recovery, but you do have to do the response prevention. Because if you're just doing exposure, freaking out, trying to go back to the situation and mentally solve it, you're actually making yourself worse. And when we go back to like the previous question of testing yourself or thinking of past mistakes or events and things like that, right? So, instead saying, okay, I got triggered, good, but I'm going to choose to make it an exercise and I'm going to choose not to react. And that's actually a really good step forward in the recovery. So next question is, how long does it take for an average person to fully recover from OCD? And the person's asking about POCD specifically. Really, the topic of the OCD is irrelevant. It could be any topic. It doesn't specifically matter if it's like HOCD or POCD or ROCD. It doesn't really matter. It's the same thing, really, in terms of recovery. It depends on how much you are doing in terms of reassurance. If you're doing 90% no reassurance, 10% reassurance, you're going to recover within a few months, on average. Just because, like, at that point, you're doing everything right, and it's your brain that needs to readjust on a physical level of how it reacts, like how it raises and lowers, say, your adrenaline and cortisol. So it's more like a physical adjustment that you're waiting for, and you're just kind of going through that period and, trying not to react, right? So, but if you are, one day you're reacting, one day you're not reacting, then you're not in recovery at all. So you're not even started that process, So after you start and you really are going at 80 or 90%, I would say a few months, but you have to go full force on it and just anything to do. So for you specifically, right, like you're asking about POCD, right? So if anything to do with POCD is OCD, I'm not reacting to it. Anything to do with these thoughts, I'm just not reacting. Or the person is asking about harm OCD, right? That anything to do with harm, I'm not reacting. Or religious OCD, anything to do with religion that gives me anxiety, I'm not reacting. And if you go that full force, then you'll be good. And then it'll just take a few months. So next question I have is it normal to feel almost scared as you start to have better days and slowly overcome OCD? It's as if you start questioning why the thoughts were there in the first place, if that makes sense. Because when you start to overcome OCD, it's like you have that room in your mind where, you can kind of think about the thoughts. You're not so consumed by the thought itself with, fear and panic. But again, it's not digging into it, not trying to figure anything out, If you didn't have OCD, this topic, like this thought, would not even be an issue in any way, shape, or form. So there's no reason for you to try to figure it out. There's no reason for it to be in your mind. And you're asking why the thoughts were there. The thoughts were there because you reacted to them. If you reacted to some thought that was in a foreign language, that's the thought, but with a lot of fear for some reason, right? Then that's the thought that would come back to you. It just sent you whatever thought you reacted to with fear. And the reason why you reacted with fear to the thought is because, A, you weren't expecting it. It came all of a sudden. It surprised and shocked you. And the topic means a lot to you, in terms of, like, say, for example, people to whom family or just, being a nice person, not harming others. For people who very much value that, they will get harm OCD. people who are very religious, or maybe brought up in a very religious family, right? They might get religious OCD. If people who are like really into their job, they might have OCD that has something to do with their job. OCD always attaches to what is the most important to you and flips it around, So that's kind of like, because if what's most important to you is what you're the most afraid of harming or like messing up in some way, right? So just that's the nature of it. There's no surprise when it comes to OCD why a certain person getting certain thoughts. It just has to do, and that's why so many people who have OCD get harm OCD specifically, because it's people who have OCD are generally very sensitive, and by sensitive I also mean very nice. And people who are very nice, the worst thing that they can think of is harming somebody on a mental level, on a physical level, and that's usually the thoughts they get stuck on. So the next question I have is, hi Ali, do you have a good tip on overcome HIV OCD? Again, same thing. It's a thought about HIV, whatever it is, doesn't matter, right? It's a thought about HIV, I'm not reacting anymore, I'm not playing that game anymore. Every day, if the thought comes into your mind a million times a day, you say this to yourself and you refuse to play the game of checking, figuring out, doing tests, getting reassurance. All of this is gone, right? As soon as you stop playing the game, OCD will start to go away. And as you continue to play the game, you feel more and more like, maybe I have it, maybe this, maybe that, like it starts to really kind of play tricks on you, and I had HIV OCD at one point as well, and it's, just not doing any, don't look it up online, don't go to the doctors, don't do any of this stuff. This is all OCD, and the more you react, the worse it will get, so stop the reaction, don't play that game anymore. So next question I have is, how do you bounce back from being in OCD so deep that you actually believe something happened in the past? And the way you bounce back is slowly start to pull yourself out of it. I know it's very difficult when you are at 10 out of 10, but at least if you feel like you can't pull yourself out of it, try to delay it. So you can say, I can't get rid of the thought. I can't refuse solving it right now, but I can refuse solving it for 2 hours. And then I'll solve it. Then I'll give it all the time in the world, but for the next 2 hours, I'm not going to do that. By delaying, you're still showing your mind that it's not all that important to you. When the 2 hours are up, try to go 2 more hours. So you're gaining power, but you're gaining it a little bit slower. And that's like if you can't disregard completely, but really just, it's just about, like I said, just about not playing the game anymore, because you will not be able to win the game. There's not, how I say, out of the millions of people who have OCD, there's no case of anybody ever doing anything, acting on the thoughts that they've had, right? There's also not a case where a person fully got over OCD by simple reassurance, It just, what usually happens is if reassurance is convincing enough, the OCD thought goes away and a new one replaces it, either right away or later in life. Depending on the situation. Sometimes it could be minutes, sometimes it could be, a person can go years and then, get another OCD attack. Because they don't really learn truly like the recovery process, so it just hits them again. So at 10 out of 10, you will feel like it feels very real. So you can feel like a false memory OCD, right? That, you really feel like something did happen. But it's normal to feel like that at 10 out of 10 OCD. So not buying into it. Like, yes, it feels like that. OCD always feels real. For anybody who has OCD, it feels real. Because if it didn't feel real, they would not have OCD. They would be able to dismiss it. They can't dismiss it because of how real it feels. So, yes, it will feel real. Yes, it feels like something actually happened. It's OCD. That is normal for OCD. You worrying about the fact that it feels real is like the same thing where a person, say, has a cold, has runny nose. Oh my God, why am I having runny nose? Well, you have runny nose because you have a cold. You have thoughts that feel real because you have OCD. That's all, So it's getting past it, and just anything to do with your topic, ignoring it, choosing to ignore it, because you will always feel like you need proof, and then you will feel like, well, if I choose to ignore it, what if it comes true? Well, when you're going to be that one person in a million people for whom it will come true, then you'll deal with it. I don't think that that's going to be you. I really don't. But it's you can say that to yourself, that when it happens, then I'll deal with it. Until it happens, I'm not going to take that, unrealistic, chance of, out of all these people, it has to be me. No, I'm just not going to react anymore. So next question I have is about people asking about unwanted arousal and unwanted attraction. And I mean, it's, again, the more you're reacting, the more you will feel, the more it will feel real. And it can feel real in all kinds of ways, including that, So it's just not reacting, all of these symptoms will go away because they're just symptoms of OCD. They have no merit, they have no validity, they're just OCD symptoms. But they will continue for as long as you react, so stop reacting. Okay, so next two questions are pretty similar. People are asking me to tell my story about OCD and recovery. I think I did a video on it. If I find it, I'm going to link it down below. In short, I only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to kind of make it short, and I'm going to make a separate video on my story if I haven't had one, but I think I should have had one over the years somewhere. But basically, I started to get, all of a sudden, just like everybody else, right? Well, I guess it started when I was little, but it was very much on and off, so I would have a thought, get worked up, like as a kid, right? Then kind of get over it, not have a thought maybe for years, then get another thought, get worked up for like a month, then not have another thought for years again. When I was about 12 years old, it started to really ramp up, and I think that generally for most people between 10 and 12 years old, like this is what I see with clients, is OCD starts to become more severe. So this is a very common story, and this is when I would get thoughts about like, what if something would happen to my parents, like typical OCD thoughts that kids get. Before that, I don't really remember what kinds of thoughts I had, just because I was so young. But yeah, at that point, that's what I would get, and I would really get upset about it. Like, say, like, if I step on a crack, then that means something bad will happen to, like, my mom or dad, and all of that, and that really bothered me for a long time. And then, I think through my teenage years, I didn't really get much OCD. Maybe towards the later part of my teenage years, I got... the first one I remember, because it's like, I mean, this has been a while, right? That is, I had a really strong HIV OCD. And I got it all of a sudden, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And of course, I did like a million tests and a lot of checking and reassurance, because, you got to understand, coming from, I'm originally from Ukraine, right? So coming from a country that it's almost taboo to talk about this kind of stuff, like mental issues, it's it's just not talked about, So I had no idea what OCD was. And right now, in today's world, right, there's a lot of information on OCD. Probably not as much as needed, but there is at least some. When I started to have OCD, there was none. I never heard the term. I didn't know anything about it. So I did a lot of reassurance, a lot of HIV tests, a lot of checking, a lot of online research. And just, pretty much what everybody does when they get OCD, just making myself worse and worse with every single day. And it lasted for a long time. And then it started to switch into other different topics of OCD. I pretty much went through most topics of OCD and really, at some point getting enough reassurance that the topic was no longer relevant, or maybe my life circumstances changed where the topic was no longer relevant, and then going to a different topic and getting reassurance from that. And then, at some point I started to see that there was a mechanism to it. Like, this is not just, like, I mean, they're just thoughts, but there's a pattern to how things are happening, And really learning that, no matter how much reassurance I try to get, it doesn't work. It makes things worse. It doesn't make things better. It just that the thought might change, but really it's, like, who cares if you're having, say harm OCD or religious OCD or HIV OCD or whatever type of OCD. It doesn't really matter, you're still equally as distressed at level 10 OCD, So as I started to see the pattern, and then I started to really research OCD specifically, and it's kind of like, I'm trying to give you like a very short story of it. There's much more to it, of course, but I was also taking medication, and the medication wasn't working well, like SSRIs. So, and then I started to understand that the doctors that were trying to help me didn't really know anything about it. So that led me to more research, but now not about my thoughts, but about OCD and how it functions and how the brain functions in general, and this protective mechanism and everything. And, just kind of evolved slowly, where I started to understand the patterns, and really kind of understanding that what I was doing was wrong, because I could see that the times that I was not paying attention to the thoughts, I was feeling better for maybe a day or half a day or just a few hours. And as soon as I would dive into the thoughts, I'd feel worse. And I noticed that at some point. I think I did it actually by accident the first time. And like, I just, you start to see that that's, oh, okay, there's something happening. And, and I started to kind of develop the technique and doing the right things more and more and more. And, and then recovered, So it's like, sometimes people say, well, like, did you do something special? No, I struggled and failed, and really kind of by method of elimination of doing everything wrong, figured out that, none of that was working. The reassurance wasn't working. The avoidance wasn't working. I couldn't run away from it. I couldn't solve it. The only thing I could do is not play the game anymore, and as I figured that out, that's when I started to recover, and then, after doing that for a while, I slowly recovered. So that's just kind of short version. I'll see if I can find the video that I describe more of it in. So because this video took a little bit longer than I thought, and I still have quite a bit of questions, this is going to be part 1, and I'm going to do part 2 that will get to the rest of the questions. So if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe, and then stay tuned for part 2.